I was just tying my daughter's shoelaces in the parking lot behind the center on a normal afternoon, the late-day sun slanting through the rows of parked cars. Everything was happening just like it had 100 days before, until a little girl I'd never met walked up, stopped right in front of me, gently tugged on the hem of my jacket with a touch so light it was almost not there, looked right at me, not searching for attention, but as if looking for someone who had been gone a very long time, and in a voice so quiet I had to hold my breath to hear it. She asked me a question that I knew, in that very moment, wasn't meant for me. Can you stay a little longer? And it was then that I understood that some children don't want to talk, not because they can't, but because they're waiting for someone who will stay long enough not to leave. I'm not the person you think of when you talk about changing a child's life. I'm not a doctor, not a therapist, not someone with a wall full of diplomas to explain what was happening inside her head. I'm just a dad, a regular dad, living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Seattle, trying to balance work with getting my daughter to school each morning, remembering to buy milk before the store closes, and hoping I'm doing a good enough job even though there's no way to be sure. My job at the center isn't something that gets a lot of attention. I fix things that are broken, move tables and chairs, change light bulbs. I handle the kind of work that, if you do it right, no one notices, but if you do it wrong, everyone does. I used to teach music to young kids years ago when my life was heading in a different direction. But then things changed, and I chose a job that worked better with my daughter's schedule, not because it was the best choice, but because it was the necessary one. Olivia always came with me after school. She was used to doing her homework in a small corner near the indoor garden, used to the sound of other kids, used to finding her own joy in the little things that adults usually overlook. I didn't teach her how to make friends with the kids there. She did that on her own. She has her own way of approaching people, not asking too many questions, not pushing, just simply being there, long enough that people don't feel pressured to be a different version of themselves. Maybe that's what I learned after everything that's happened in my life. You don't always have to say the right thing. Sometimes the most important thing is whether or not you stay. So, when that little girl grabbed my jacket in the parking lot, I didn't think there was anything I could do to help. I had no plan, no answers, and I certainly had no intention of becoming part of someone else's story. But I didn't leave, and it turns out sometimes that's all it takes for things to start to change. I started noticing her in the afternoons that followed, not because I was looking for anything special, but because some people walk into a space and practically disappear. She didn't disappear. She withdrew in a way that made you unable to ignore her. Mia wasn't like the other kids at the center. It wasn't because she didn't talk. It was because of the way she chose not to. Some kids are quiet because they don't know what to say, or because they're afraid of being wrong. But Mia wasn't like that. You could see it clearly if you were willing to stand still long enough to watch. She understood everything. She understood when the adults were talking about her, even when they lowered their voices, understood when another kid was trying to ask her to play, but didn't know how to start, and she even understood the pauses in other people's stories that most everyone misses. Mia wasn't on the sidelines. She was in the middle of everything, just without participating in words. She would sit on the edge of the playground, not too far, but not too close, just enough to see everything without being pulled in, like someone watching a movie they've seen too many times to be surprised anymore, but still can't bring themselves to leave. One time, I saw Olivia bring out a box of toys and start sorting them by color, an idea she often comes up with when she's bored with the usual things. And Mia sat a few steps away, saying nothing, just watching. 10 minutes later, Mia scooted a little closer. 20 minutes later, she started handing Olivia the exact toy she was looking for. Before Olivia even had a chance to name it, not a single word was spoken. But it was all happening. And that's when I understood something that maybe a lot of adults had missed. Mia wasn't trapped in silence. She was choosing it, not because she wanted to disappear, but because something inside her made speaking feel too costly. I'd met kids like that before. When I used to teach music, kids who could feel a melody before they could name it, kids who understood rhythm, but never wanted to be the one to start it. You can't pull them out from where they're standing. You can only be there long enough and quiet enough for them to step forward on their own when they feel safe. Mia looked at me in a way a child shouldn't have to. It's not a look of curiosity, and it's not fear either. It's the look of someone checking to see if you're going to leave. And if you look closely, you realize it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with someone else. Someone the little girl once believed would stay. I wasn't there the night everything started to change for Mia, but there are stories you don't need to witness firsthand to understand what happened. You just have to look closely enough at what was left behind. There's a kind of silence you can recognize immediately, not because it's empty, but because it's being held back intentionally, like a door that's been closed from the inside, and the person standing on the outside doesn't know whether to knock or just walk away. Mia carried that kind of silence. It wasn't the silence of having nothing to say, but the silence of having too much that couldn't be said without breaking something more important. I began to piece together her story from the little details adults usually overlook. The times she would glance toward the door whenever there was a sound louder than usual. The moments she would hold her breath when an adult accidentally raised their voice in conversation, and the way she reacted to the word stay as if it were an uncertainty. You don't need anyone to tell you that there was once a night in that house that wasn't quiet. A night when the adults' voices were no longer at a level they thought children wouldn't understand. A night when words were no longer chosen carefully. A night when emotions overrode every attempt at control. I can picture that room. The light still on long after bedtime. Words repeated over and over, but no longer carrying the same meaning as they did at the start. And somewhere in that house, a child awake, listening to every sound the adults thought she shouldn't hear. Perhaps the most important thing wasn't how the argument unfolded, but that a single sentence was uttered at a moment when it couldn't be taken back. I can't do this anymore. To an adult, that might just be a phrase said in anger, something to be explained later, or forgotten when things calm down. But to a child, that sentence isn't part of the argument. It's the conclusion. And when a door closes after that, whether it's right then or the next morning, whether it's for good or just a departure from daily life, in a child's mind, those two events will forever be linked in the simplest way their brain can understand. Words lead to loss. Speaking means someone will leave. I've seen it before, not just with Mia, but with many other children, each with a different story, but the same conclusion that no one taught them. They learned it themselves, from a moment They weren't old enough to understand, but were old enough to remember. So they don't stop thinking. They don't stop feeling. They just stop talking. And if you watch Mia long enough, you realize she hasn't lost her voice. She's just holding on to it, as if it's the only way to keep the people she loves from disappearing again. Some children don't stop talking. They just stop when they no longer feel safe enough to be heard. I didn't teach Olivia what to do with Mia, and in truth, I couldn't have, because she's never needed anyone to teach her how to approach someone in the way that makes them feel most at ease. Olivia didn't ask Mia why she didn't talk. She didn't try to pull Mia into any games that Mia didn't initiate. She simply showed up every afternoon in the same area, with the same patience that children rarely have, but that comes naturally when they aren't complicated by adults. Some days, Olivia would sit on the ground, open her box of crayons, and just start drawing. Not saying much, just occasionally commenting on her own picture as if she were telling a story to herself. Mia would sit a few steps away, far enough not to be pulled in, but close enough not to miss anything that was happening. 10 minutes would pass. Nothing changed. 20 minutes would pass, and the distance between the two children would shrink a little. Not obviously, no one actively noticed, but you could see it if you were paying attention. Olivia didn't look at Mia too often, because she understood that some looks make people feel watched, while other looks are simply to let you know that you are not alone. One time, Olivia brought out a box of old toys and started sorting them by color, a game she made up for herself whenever she needed something to do with. Her hands and Mia sat beside her for longer than usual, so long that Olivia started narrating what she was doing out of habit. This one is blue, this one is yellow, this one's probably a little lighter blue, but that's okay. Mia didn't answer. But when Olivia reached for a yellow piece and couldn't find it, Mia pushed it toward her before she could even say anything. There was no thank you, no obvious reaction, but Olivia would just smile, very softly, as if that was enough. I watched all of this from a distance and didn't step in. Not because I didn't care, but because I understood that some moments vanish the instant you try to rush them. Adults often think that connection needs to be built through action, through questions, through doing the right thing at the right time. But kids don't work that way. They don't need for someone to pave the way for them. They need a space without pressure, where getting closer doesn't mean having to become a different version of themselves. Olivia never tried to make Mia talk. She just made it easier to stay, and Mia started staying a little longer each day. Not because anyone asked her to, but because there, for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel the need to protect herself from something that might happen if she took one more step. I didn't tell Rachel about what I was seeing during those afternoons, not because I wanted to keep a secret, but because I knew that if you put a name to something too soon, you accidentally turn it into a goal to be achieved, instead of a process that's unfolding on its own. And with Mia, things only started to change when no one was trying to change her. I knew the moment things started to get more complicated, it wasn't because something went wrong, but because someone started trying to make the right thing happen faster than it should. Rachel started coming out to the backyard at the same time every day. It wasn't random. You could tell just by the way she stood, the way she watched, the way her eyes kept returning to the same spot, as if everything in that space existed only to serve a single purpose. I don't blame her. If it were me, if it were my child, I probably would have done the same thing. Tried every way I could to grasp a moment that had been slipping through my fingers for so long. But there's a difference between being there and trying to control how things play out. Rachel started asking more questions. Not to Mia directly, but to the people around her, to specialists, to anyone who could give a clear answer, a concrete plan, a repeatable method to get her back to where she believed her daughter should be. One afternoon, she found me near the shed out back, where I was changing a light bulb that had been flickering for 2 days. She spoke very directly, very clearly, in the way of someone used to things being solved by decisions and actions. She said that she'd been observing what was happening between Olivia and Mia, that she thought we could create more opportunities like it. That if we arranged the time, the space, even the activities intentionally, maybe Mia would start talking again sooner. She didn't say it forcefully. She said it like someone who was trying to do the best she could with what she had. I understood that, but I also understood something else. I put the screwdriver down, turned to face her and spoke slowly. Not to argue, but to give her a chance to really hear what she was proposing. You can't force a child to feel safe by managing everything around them. She didn't react right away, not because she didn't understand, but because it wasn't the kind of answer she was used to getting. In her world, problems existed to be solved, and if you had enough resources, enough information, enough determination, then almost nothing was impossible to improve. But this wasn't like anything she'd ever handled before. This wasn't a system that could be optimized. This was a child learning to trust again, that speaking wouldn't make someone disappear. Rachel said she just wanted to help. I nodded, because I knew that was true. But helping and controlling are sometimes separated by a very thin line, and that line often disappears when you're terrified of losing the very thing you're trying to hold on to. I told her that if Mia had chosen a moment to open up, what made that moment exist wasn't the external circumstances, but an internal feeling. And that feeling couldn't be recreated by rearranging everything around it. She looked at me a little longer than usual, as if weighing whether to argue or to listen. It was a tiny moment, but I could clearly see the collision of two different ways of seeing the world. One side believes that anything can be built if you just do it right. The other side understands that some things only happen when you stop trying to control them. Rachel didn't argue further. She just nodded, thanked me for being direct, and then left with that familiar composure. People like her always maintain in front of others, but I knew the conversation didn't end there. It was just beginning. I noticed the change before anyone said a word. Not because it was obvious, but because it was all too familiar to anyone who has watched something start to form only to be suddenly pulled back. Rachel still showed up at the center, still on time, still with that controlled demeanor she always had, but there was a subtle difference in her presence, an invisible distance that, if you weren't paying attention, you'd think nothing had changed. But if you looked closely, you'd see that everything had. She no longer sat in the chair near the playground in the afternoons. She stood a little farther away, usually near the entrance, where she could observe without truly entering the space. When our eyes happened to meet, she would still nod, still be polite, but everything became shorter, more clipped, like a necessary exchange, rather than the natural presence it had been before. I didn't need to ask to know what had happened. Not because she said it, but because people in her position always have others around them, reminding them that the world doesn't just run on feelings, that every relationship can be interpreted as either an asset or a liability, and that sometimes the right thing to do isn't the safest. I'd seen that kind of influence before, not at work, but in my own life when people start to doubt the things they once believed were simple. So I pulled back, not because I was angry, and not because I wanted to prove a point, but because I understand that when someone is trying to create distance, the worst thing you can do is take another step forward. I still did my job, still showed up at the usual times, but I no longer lingered by the playground. No longer stayed within a range where my presence could be interpreted in different ways. Olivia still played like before. She didn't change, because kids aren't affected by the things adults think are important. But even she started to notice something was different. Not in words, but in the way she would occasionally look over at me, more often, as if checking to see if I was still there. And Mia noticed faster than anyone, not with her mind, but with her senses. She didn't need to hear anyone say anything, didn't need to see a clear action, just the subtle shift in how people moved, in the way the space grew wider, in how moments that once felt natural started to feel cut short. Mia started to sit a little farther away. Not by much, just a few steps. But for a child like her, those few steps were an entire world of distance. She no longer offered things to Olivia before being asked. She still watched, still observed, but her gaze was no longer as open as before. It became more cautious, like someone who had tried to step out, and was now considering whether to go back to where she was. I'd seen this before. That moment when a child starts to believe it's okay to stay, and then a tiny signal makes them think that maybe they were wrong. No one did anything obviously wrong. No major event took place. It was just a shift, enough to make a child retreat to a place where she once felt safer, even if that place was the silence she had created for herself. And the hardest thing about moments like that isn't that things are moving backward. It's that you know it's happening, but if you try to stop it the wrong way, you'll make it shut down completely. That day was planned as a perfect event, a community outreach sponsored by Rachel's company, with press, activities for the children, prepared speeches, and a space designed to look both friendly and professional, and that anyone who walked in would feel that this was a place doing something right. I arrived with Olivia, just like any other day, except today the space no longer felt familiar. The sounds were louder than usual. More people, more eyes, and what adults call a lively atmosphere, for some children, is just too much happening at once, with no room to retreat. I saw Mia as soon as I stepped onto the playground. She was standing near the main activity area, not because she wanted to join in, but likely because someone had led her there, believing it was a good step forward. But you can tell immediately when a child has gone past their limit, not by how they react, but by how they stop reacting. Mia was standing perfectly still, too quiet. Her shoulders tensed slightly, her gaze no longer fixed on any one point, but starting to dart around, as if searching for an escape in a space where all the exits were blocked. Rachel saw it almost immediately. I saw the way she turned, the way she signaled to an organizer, the way she began to move in a pre-programmed sequence of actions, calling people, clearing a path, creating space, controlling the situation the way she always did so well. For most people, it was the right reaction. But for Mia, It was the moment the world started to move too fast around her again. I was on the other side of the field when I realized it. I didn't run. I didn't call out to anyone. I went straight to Olivia first, touched her shoulder lightly, and said her name just once, enough for her to understand that something needed her attention. Olivia followed my gaze and immediately fell silent, something she rarely does. Then followed me without another word. We approached Mia, but we didn't stand over her, didn't pull her away, didn't add another movement to the vortex that was surrounding her then. I sat down, right on the ground, slowly, as if it were the most normal thing a person could do in the middle of a crowded event. I pulled Olivia down to sit in front of me, creating a small space. No calls, no instructions, just a quiet zone for a child to breathe again. I started talking to Olivia as if nothing else was happening. I picked up our unfinished story up at the caterpillar she'd found that morning, asking if she'd decided on a name for it, and Olivia answered, her voice quieter than usual, but still with that natural rhythm she always has. The sounds of the event were still there, but the space right in front of us began to separate from it. Mia looked at me, not like before, not observing, but searching. I didn't touch her. I didn't say her name. I just stayed there, keeping the rhythm slow enough for her to step into if she wanted to. And then she stepped forward, without hesitation, without looking around. She just walked straight to me, bent down a little, and her two hands grabbed my jacket, tighter than the first time. No longer a light touch, but a grip. I looked down at her, and this time she spoke clearly. Her voice was still quiet, but it wasn't broken anymore. Don't let him leave again. Everything around us seemed to slow down for a moment. I didn't need to ask who she was talking about, and I didn't need to look at Rachel to understand what had just happened. Because those words didn't belong to that afternoon. They belonged to another evening, in another place, at a time when a little girl couldn't keep someone from leaving, and now, standing in a space full of people, she was trying again with the closest person she believed might not leave. Rachel was standing not far from us. I didn't turn around right away, but I could feel the change in the way she stood, in the way all her movements had stopped mid-action, as if everything she had prepared to do no longer fit what had just been said. No one needed to explain what it meant. It was clear in the way the most important things always are, without needing any more words. After things settled, the sounds of the event were still there, but no longer reached us in the same way, as if some layer had separated that moment from the rest of the world. Mia was still standing in front of me, her hands still clutching my jacket, but the grip had softened. It wasn't panic anymore, but more like an anchor, as if she was testing whether it was really safe to be there. Rachel approached, slower than usual. These weren't the decisive steps of a problem solver anymore, but measured ones, as if each movement could shift something fragile in the air. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, looking at her daughter, and in her eyes there was no longer control or calculation, but something else. A realization taking shape, but not yet fully formed. I stood up, gently enough that Mia wouldn't feel abandoned, and looked at Rachel. Not to explain, but to say the thing she probably already knew but had never put a name to. She's not afraid of speaking. She's afraid of what happens after. I said it slowly, not for emphasis, but to let each word have the time to exist in its own right. Rachel didn't react right away, but you could see that moment when a person starts to understand something they've seen as countless times before, but never truly looked at. She looked at Mia, not as a problem to be solved, but as a child carrying a story she had never fully heard. Everything started to connect, not in her head, but in a deeper place, where answers aren't logical, but are a feeling you can't deny once you've touched it. She understood that all this time, she had been trying to get Mia to talk again, trying to create the right conditions, the right moments, the right methods, but she'd never stopped to ask what speaking actually meant to Mia. If every time you spoke, it was tied to a memory of someone leaving right after, then silence isn't the problem. Silence is the safest way to keep everything that's left from breaking. Rachel knelt down to Mia's level, not touching her right away, just being there. Close enough for Mia to know she wasn't going anywhere, and slow enough not to shatter what had just opened up. In that moment, no one was trying to fix anything. There was no plan, no instructions, just a mother. For the first time, seeing her child, not as something that needed to be changed, but as someone trying to hold on to something important in the only way she knew how. And for the first time, she didn't try to change it. We left the event area earlier than planned. There was no announcement, no explanation given, just a quiet decision that everyone involved understood was necessary. I didn't go with them. I stayed behind, far enough away not to be part of a moment I knew wasn't mine, but close enough to see that something important was beginning to happen. Rachel sat down next to Mia on a wooden bench near the fence, where fewer people were passing by. The late afternoon light cut across their faces, making everything seem calmer than the chaos of just a few minutes before. She didn't speak right away. No rushing, no trying to fill the space with the sentences adults use when they can't bear the silence between two people. She was just there, on Mia's level, letting the girl have time to realize that this time, nothing was about to be rushed away. Then Rachel spoke, her voice no longer certain like it was in a boardroom, no longer controlled like in a professional exchange, but the voice of someone saying something they'd never allowed themselves to say before. Mum was scared. She paused for a very short beat, not because she didn't know what to say next, but because, for the first time, she was letting that feeling exist long enough to be named. Mom was scared that night, and I didn't know how to stay with you in that feeling. Mia didn't take her eyes off her mother. She didn't look away, didn't shrink back like she had before, but just stood still, listening in a way that you knew every word was being placed somewhere very deep inside. Rachel didn't promise that everything would be okay. She didn't say that she didn't need to be afraid. She didn't say the past didn't matter. She just continued, slowly, as if each sentence was being laid down with great care. I tried to fix everything. I thought if I made things right, you would feel okay again. But I didn't stay with you. I left you alone in that moment. No one interrupted. There was no other sound except for the very soft wind and the distant movements from the rest of the event. Mia took a small step closer. Not much, just enough of a shift to change the meaning of standing next to each other. She reached out and took hold of Rachel's sleeve, not to hold on this time, but to connect. Rachel took a deep breath, not to calm herself, but to give herself permission to stop trying to be calm. I'm still scared sometimes. It wasn't said as a weakness, but as a truth that was finally being acknowledged. And I'm still here. Mia looked at her for another second, as if checking to see if the words were real. Then she took a step forward and hugged her mother. No hesitation, no holding back, a full hug. The kind it only give when they no longer have to protect themselves. Rachel didn't immediately squeeze back. She let the moment happen at its own pace. Then she hugged back, slowly, solidly, not trying to rush or control anything. After a moment, Mia pulled away, not completely, just enough to look up. She pointed to the small book, sitting on the bench side. Them, a book Rachel had probably brought more out of habit than any real plan. Mia opened it to a page and stopped at a very simple word, one that any child her age could read, but for her it had been lying there for a very long time, unspoken. She looked at the word, then up at her mother, and this time she said it. Just one word, clearly, without rushing. But it was enough to change everything that had been standing still. In the weeks that followed, things returned to a kind of normal in the way that truly important things often do. Without noise, without an announcement, just gradually becoming so familiar it feels like it was always there. That afternoon was like many others. The sun was getting low behind the buildings. The breeze was just enough to stir the leaves on the fence, and the yard behind the center had returned to the slow rhythm I'd grown used to. I was fixing the chain on the old swing set, a job I'd put off for a few days, because other things kept getting in the way, and Olivia was off in the distance, carrying on a conversation whose meaning was clear only to her. The garden gate opened. Mia walked in first, followed by Rachel, who was holding 2 cups of coffee. A habit, I guessed, she had just recently started to keep for herself. Mia didn't stop to observe like she used to. She walked straight toward me, her steps more certain now, not fast, but without hesitation. She stopped a short distance away, looked at me for a moment, then glanced over at Rachel. Her voice was still new, still carried the carefulness of someone relearning how to use something they'd put away for too long. But it was clearer now, no longer having to fight through anything to be heard. "Can he come for dinner?" Rachel stood still for a very short moment, just long enough for you to realize the question wasn't just about a meal. She looked at Mia, then over at me, and in her eyes there was no longer the calculation or hesitation of before, but an openness, something not yet defined, but no longer held back. I put my tool down, not rushing to answer, not because I didn't know what I would say, but because some answers need to be placed in the exact moment they matter most. Olivia was suddenly standing next to Mia. Her eyes lit up in that way kids' eyes do when they think they've just witnessed something important that the adults haven't noticed yet. No one said anything for the next few seconds, but there was no awkwardness in the air. It was just a necessary pause, allowing something new to begin in the most natural way possible. I never thought I would become a part of their story. I didn't do anything special to make it happen either. I didn't fix the past. I didn't change anything that came before. I just stayed long enough for a child to believe that this time, when she spoke, no one would leave again. Some stories don't end with everything becoming perfect. They end with someone finally understanding something the right way, after having tried to understand it the wrong way for a very long time. I don't think Mia needed someone to teach her how to talk again. She always knew how. What she needed, and maybe what so many of us need, wasn't advice or some special technique. It was the feeling that when you finally say something real, someone will still be there to listen. We grow up with this idea that if we're strong enough, in control enough, or right enough, then things won't leave us. But the truth is, Some things can't be held onto by trying to control them, and some relationships can't be repaired by just trying to make everything look right. Sometimes, the only thing that truly makes a difference isn't what you say, but whether or not you're there when someone needs you. Not to solve the problem, not to give them the answers, but simply so they don't have to be alone in the moment they're most afraid. I used to think I needed to do something big to make a change, but after all this, what I learned was so much simpler. You don't have to be the person who understands everything. You don't have to be the person who knows what to say in every situation. You just have to be the person who doesn't leave too soon. And if there's one thing this story can leave you with, perhaps it's a question that each of us has to answer in our own way. Is there someone in your life who's waiting for you to stay just a little bit longer? Not to fix them, but just so they can believe that this time they won't be left behind again. Thank you for staying until the end of this story. If this story touched you in some way, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, because sometimes a story is only truly complete when it continues on through other people's perspectives. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, stories about family, about the things left unsaid, and about how people change when they begin to understand each other better, can subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one.